Hey everyone, welcome to HasuraCon 2023. This is day 2. I hope you've enjoyed the workshops yesterday and the keynotes and sessions so far today. So I'm Rishi Divte, Head of Product Management at Hasura, and today I'm going to talk about how you can accelerate development of your APIs with Hasura data connectors. If you're watching this live, I invite you to keep this session engaging by interacting with us via chat. So moving on to the agenda, I will kick things off with an overview of what our data connectors are and what they can do for you. I'll then talk about Hasura innovations and wrap it up with what's coming in the near future. So first, let's talk about what data connectors are. Data connectors allow you to connect Hasura to any data source, like a database, a service, or even a file like a CSV file. These connectors connect to the data source and translate GraphQL API requests that come into the Hasura GraphQL engine to the query language or API supported by the data source. For example, in case of databases, Hasura will translate a GraphQL API to SQL. So in this presentation, I'm primarily going to focus on Hasura's out-of-the-box connectors for databases, but I'll also talk about how Hasura lets you build data connectors of your own. So we have a number of data connectors for transactional and analytical databases, as well as for query engines like Amazon Athena. On the transactional side, while we've had support for Postgres and SQL Server for a while, we just announced support for MongoDB. Please check out Martin Mark's presentation on our new Mongo connector if you haven't already. We also recently went GA with our MySQL, MariaDB, and Oracle data connectors. On the transactional side, we've had support for BigQuery for a while, and recently went GA with our Snowflake data connector. The question I get, especially from platform architects, is what if Hasura doesn't support a data source that I need? So for that, you can build your own connector via our GraphQL data connector spec, SDK, and reference connectors. This is something that we announced last year, and we've been getting interest from a number of folks since then. Now we've talked about what data connectors are, let's talk about what they do. Firstly, with these connectors, Hasura is able to automatically generate a GraphQL schema based on the tables and views in your database. You no longer need to write a schema, endpoints, or resolvers by hand. So you can do anything you usually would with your database by using GraphQL constructs. And the first and most basic construct that these connectors support are GraphQL queries. A GraphQL query is how you read or fetch data from a GraphQL server like Hasura. What these connectors do is automatically translate GraphQL queries into select queries that the database understands, and it sends those results via the Hasura GraphQL engine to your API client. You can also aggregate, filter, and sort results within the GraphQL query itself. By the way, the queries to the database are automatically optimized, so you don't have to do anything manually. As you would expect, the next capability is mutations. A GraphQL mutation allows you to create, update, or delete data. Next up is subscriptions. These allow you to push data from the database to a GraphQL client in real time. There is an open connection from the client to Hasura using the WebSockets protocol, which allows Hasura to quickly send data back to the client when a specific event occurs on the database. We also support streaming subscriptions for Postgres, where Hasura will send new or most recent data for a given result set. Then we have event triggers that allow you to call business logic when changes are made in a connected database. For example, you may want to send a welcome email when a new user is created in the database. All right, so now that we've talked about what data connectors do, let's look at some of the latest innovations in this space. We recently announced support for native queries and logical models for Postgres, BigQuery, and Microsoft SQL Server. This is coming from the need for using more custom or advanced database capabilities that don't come out of the box. So how this works is, native queries allow you to automatically generate a GraphQL API around raw SQL queries, giving you more flexibility and control over your Hasura-generated GraphQL schema. A logical model represents the structure of data returned by a native query. Think of it as though we're creating a view on top of your data within Hasura without you needing to create it on the database. And as you know, that often requires your database admin to give you DDL privileges. So these features can help you do a bunch of things such as group bys, window functions, or scalar functions. You can also use custom arguments in your API, encapsulate filtering with a query, and use advanced features of your database to improve performance. So I highly encourage you to check out David Melany's talk tomorrow on how to unlock the full potential of your database, where he'll talk more about native queries and logical models. So next up, we recently announced support for a much requested feature from our user community, support for SQL Server stored procedures. Stored procedures in SQL Server are a batch of SQL statements that can be compiled and stored in the server database itself. This is typically done to capture commonly used custom business logic or to extend the built-in SQL functions and operators. And now you can track and execute SQL Server stored procedures via Hasura. While we had joins for Postgres, BigQuery, and SQL Server, we recently provided support for our remote joins across all our databases. So please check out Vaishnavi's talk tomorrow on Data Federation Made Easy with Hasura for more details and for some cool demos. Another highly requested feature for Postgres is aggregation queries for computed fields, where we calculate computed field values and aggregate them on the fly. So as you can see in the screenshot, you can do aggregations like average or min on an existing computed field like word count. Okay, so now let's talk about what's coming next. So we plan to continue to release new connectors for NoSQL, transactional, and analytical databases. And we'll continue to iterate and release additional features for existing connectors to unlock even more use cases. For example, mutations for Snowflake and event triggers and subscriptions for MySQL and other databases. We also plan to harness the power of native queries and logical models for all other databases. And finally, we'll continue to make it easier to build new connectors by enhancing the SDK. We also have a new GraphQL data connector spec for Hasura v3 in which you will be able to handle state. As a result, you will be able to use advanced features such as elastic connection pooling and dynamic routing. We've also made the spec more generic and less database-centric, which means as a creator, you can create a connector for a REST API like Stripe and leverage new features on the agent such as parameterized models and commands. So I highly encourage you to check out Rahul's talk on Hasura version 3. A lot of exciting work is happening there. So that's it from me today. I'd like to thank you for listening to my talk, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.